Apparently, there was a bit of a bloodbath.
The whole left is filled with hate. The left has destroyed everything, from the Boy Scouts to music, to art, to architecture. Leftism is a destruction machine. It's like nothing matters. All that matters is January 6th.
Yeah, that's going to stand out more in my mind, even if they failed at it, than whether or not.
We are going to be speaking with Dennis Prager, host of the Dennis Prager Show. He's been on with me before, co-founder of PragerU, and also Stephen Kenneth Destiny Bennell II, known to some just as Destiny, known to some as Stephen, online streamer, gamer, political commentator. It's really great to have both of you on, and we've been working on this for a little bit, so many things have transpired since we kind of decided we were going to do this. So just to start somewhere and get the state of American politics right now, we had this assassination attempt against the former president, which, as I say, I am really glad did not succeed, because I want to defeat people with votes rather than bullets. That being said, Stephen, you've been criticized because you said you did not feel, and I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, particular sympathy for what happened to Donald Trump. In part because when the victims have been on the left, you do not feel that there has been sympathy equivalent to that from the right. Can you tell me if I'm correct in characterizing what you said, and maybe tell us what you feel now?
Yeah, I think that conservatives, especially under Donald Trump, have been responsible for increasing the hostility and the political divisions in this country in an unprecedented way over the past 8 years. I don't think that's just a byproduct of what Trump does. I think that's explicitly and specifically why people like Donald Trump. It's because he bullies people, he calls people names, he's boisterous, he's loud, he's angry, he represents what you really, he says what you want to hear. So if that side is going to engage in that on the rhetorical level, and then on the policy level, if you've got people who, attempt to coup the government, lead an insurrection on January 6th in order to circumvent the peaceful transfer of power, when violent things start happening, it's very hard to look at that side and go, my God, I feel so horrible that these things are happening, because this is like exactly where your rhetoric leads. Like, where else would it go to but this?
What do you think, Dennis?
So it's interesting. In preparing for this, I got to know Stephen a little better, and I watched him and Ben Shapiro for about 10, 15 minutes. It was excellent. And one of the things that I think you, Stephen, noted was the staggering, I remember you used the word brain, but I don't remember the other term, about the staggering difference between left and right. And it's definitely one arena where you and I would agree that you believe that the hate-filled rhetoric and divisive rhetoric of this country is largely due to Donald Trump rather than to the left, does offer what I always say, and I have for 40 years on my radio show: I prefer clarity to agreement. We have great clarity in that you believe that. I think it is beyond belief that you believe that. If it weren't for Donald Trump, there would be just as much divisiveness in this country. When you call virtually everybody who is conservative deplorable, when you arrest for the first time in American history the leading candidate of the opposition party and a former president, when you paint,
I feel like it definitely matters whether or not the president committed crimes. No, I love that. The president can commit like so many crimes, many crimes, and it's an escalation if under the next administration he gets arrested. It's just fucking insane.
The would-be president or a presidential candidate, as the New Republic, one of the leading left-wing magazines, does, as Hitler, and use the term regularly when the inaugural address of...
It's amazing that that a guy can quote Hitler, whether intentionally or not, or he can share and signal boost a promotional video that describes his hypothetical future presidency as a unified Reich but people comment on it, and that's seen as escalation. Fuck me, man. These guys are. It's like when you get those people who will. It's like an abuser tactic. Fuck, I'm using the word. You know, when abuse, like, there's a tendency that like abusive people will do this particular tactic, which is to calmly and politely, or even nicely, say something to you that is basically just like the perfect thing to say to like trigger you, to set you the fuck off. And then when you react, like you raise your voice, whatever, they're just like, "Whoa, what are you doing? Let's chill, okay, just chill." But the Republicans do that, except they're not even calmly doing it. Republicans just actually raise the volume and start screaming. Like the Republicans is like if someone starts fucking screaming at you, and you scream back, and they're like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 calm down, bro, calm down. You're gonna be out of hand here. Why are you being so aggressive with me?" That's how the fuck. I don't know. It's insane. It's too much.
Joe Biden, easily the most divisive president in American history, spoke of white supremacy as a threat to America.
That's you guys.
And meaning, obviously, those who vote for Donald Trump. And then say Donald Trump is responsible. If Donald Trump had been assassinated, God forbid, and I would say God forbid about Joe Biden as well, there would be not one diminution in the divisive rhetoric coming from the left. If Ron DeSantis were the nominee, he would be called Hitler as well.
So, Dennis, to be clear, you're saying you just disagree. You agree with Steven that there is a difference in terms of violent rhetoric and incitement to violence from left and right, but you believe it is the left that has been inciting the violence, not the right. Steven?
It's just a deeply unserious opinion. There's no way to like factually engage with that. Donald Trump is literally known in the entire world as being the guy that makes fun of people. He literally is the guy that gives...
he says something about Beirut being a colonial stronghold. Colonial from who? Who's colonizing Beirut? Like under the Ottomans or what?
Nicknames, divisive nicknames or derogatory nicknames to his political opponents. Sleepy Joe Biden, crooked Hillary.
I don't know if he said that.
What did he say about Ted Cruz's dad might have been the Zodiac? Like he just says so many out of pocket things that, and then it's another world. I don't know if like conservatives listening actually believe this, but when people say things like, "Oh yeah, Joe Biden is so unbelievably divisive." Really? Joe Biden, the guy that gets on stage and that we've seen like has trouble stringing together sentences. This is the insanely divisive president of fiery rhetoric. When he gets on stage and he's like, MAGA Americans. And when I say MAGA, I don't mean everybody. I just mean the ones that deny the election, right? This is the guy that's insanely divisive. But when Trump says things like, well, there was the Second Amendment, they're coming for that and we can't do anything about it. Well, maybe the Second Amendment people, can, and everybody laughs. But when Joe Biden in a private meeting to donors says, we need to put a bullseye on Donald Trump, like that's violent rhetoric. Give me a break. That's just
what about that, Dennis? Opinion. I mean, what you mentioned the reference to white nationalism or white supremacy in Joe Biden's inauguration speech, but what else has Joe Biden done in your view to incite violence?
Oh, I didn't say he incited violence. I thought the issue was divisiveness. Who is more responsible for divisive? Also, Donald Trump is one man. Calling people Sleepy Joe or Little Marco is not in the same moral ballpark as calling people Nazis and depicting your opponent as New Republic in its last issue painted Donald Trump as Hitler. The staggering amount of lies. It's the whole left world. Donald Trump is one man. The whole left is filled with hate.
Trump is the entire Republican Party. They're all locked up. Even the fucking Republican media. Even the ones who don't actually like Trump, like fucking Ben Shapiro and all that. Like he toes the line with Trump more or less because that's like, he has to. He's captured by it. He'd be out of a fucking job if he was an anti-Trump conservative. The Democrats, when they have extremism barely in their party with the fucking squad and whatever, they either temper it or they're just a minority. Like the Democrats, precisely because they didn't allow far left extremism to like fucking permeate through the entire party, the far left hates them. The far left tells you not to vote for anyone. like the extreme left, the MAGA equivalent of the left, whatever they are, they tell people to not even vote. It's so incomparable. Fuck you, man. God. Also, the examples he's giving are so shit. This is the reason Dennis Prager is in this headspace is because he thinks every Democrat is a communist, which is so ironic. But yeah,
the lie that Donald Trump said that they were fine people who were Nazis in Charlottesville. Even Snopes, which is left of center, in its fact checking said it was false that he ever said that the Nazis in Charlottesville were fine people. He wasn't referring to them. The New York.
Who is he referring to at Charlotte? It's like he didn't say the Nazis were fine people. I think what's the Snopes article say? I'm interested because he did say that at the protests there were fine people on both sides. But one of the sides was literally a bunch of people chanting, "Jews will not replace us," and gas the caselers. Unless there's a detail I'm missing. At Charlottesville, it was 2 days, right? There was the tiki torches at night on October 11th, August 11th, and 12th was the day protest where James Alex Fields ran that girl over, Heather Heyer. And the Unite the Right rally was literally organized by like Richard Spencer, like these guys, David Duke. These guys were like the leading figures of it. He did say there were very fine people on both sides, meaning both the protesters and counter-protesters. He also condemned neo-Nazis and white nationalists outright, said he was specifically referring to those who only participate in the statue protest. This is also after what, like 4 or 5 days of him not saying anything?
It's on both sides, sir. You said there was hatred, there was violence on both sides.
Well, I do think there's blame. Yes, I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. And if you reported it accurately, you would say.
Neo-Nazis started this. They showed up in Charlottesville. They showed up in Charlottesville.
Excuse me.
To protest.
Excuse me. They didn't put themselves down as you, and you had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name.
Robert E. Lee are not the same.
Well, no, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down... Excuse me. Are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson?
He's debate broing the fuck out of them.
What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue.
Woke
so
Trump.
You know what? It's fine. You're changing history. You're changing culture. And you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with the black outfits and with the helmets and with the baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in the other group too.
Treated unfairly, sir. I'm sorry, I just didn't understand what you were saying. You were saying the press has treated white nationalists unfairly?
No,
I just didn't understand what you were saying.
No. There were people in that rally, and I looked the night before.
The counter to what he's saying is that when there's a whole video of like these Unite the Right people chanting, like all of them are marching around saying Jews will not replace us. And then the next day, there's like the Unite the Right rally when there are people doing chants, like there's a guy who eggs them on to chant gas the caselers, and they all do it. Like who were these people who were just there, like who were anti-Nazi, who just wanted to protest the statue thing? Because it feels like they either left because there was fucking Nazis all over the place, or they stayed and just chanted along with, or just quietly walked along with the Nazis.
If you look, they were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. I'm sure in that group there were some bad ones. The following day it looked like they had some rough, bad people, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, whatever you want to call them. But you had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest and very legally protest because, I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit. So I only tell you that.
Who had a permit? Did Unite the Right not have a permit? Is that who's he talking to? It was a Unite the Right rally. They would approve it was moved to the McIntyre Park. Safety concerns. He relocated. The city overruled him. Charlottesville was sued on First Amendment grounds. Emergency injunction, declaring that the Unite the Rally could go forward as originally planned. He's saying the leftist counter-protesters didn't have a permit. I thought he was saying that the Nazis didn't have a permit, but the nice right-wingers did. Wait, the left-wingers, they had permits as well. Oh, but he said they didn't need protest. The counter-protesters didn't need permits to protest at the Lee Park rally. Falsely stated that counter-demonstrators lacked a permit. Okay, yeah, so it was wrong. They didn't need permits to protest in Lee Park. What, if one protest group gets a permit, can the counter-protesters just go without a permit? Is that how it works? He's talking about the Tiki Torch rally, though. He said he watched the march. White nationalist protesters had a permit, the others didn't. There were people in the rally. I looked the night before. Yeah, they were protesting quietly. He's lying. They were saying Jews will not replace us, motherfucker. Some bad ones. This was organized by fucking like Richard Spencer and shit. Why did Snopes not qualify that? They had official permission either from the court or from the city. If he did mean the Friday march, he's seriously distorting the torch lighting march by saying participants were protesting very quietly. Yeah, this is the Jews will not replace us one. God.
New York Times continues that lie to today. Joe Biden said that's the reason he ran for president, because of that horrific statement. The lying from the left and lying of smearing. This is not just Donald Trump. This is not just Joe Biden. The left smears. That's what they do. When I spoke at Arizona State University a year and a half ago, 34 professors of the 42 at the college that I spoke to at Arizona State said people should not attend because I am a bigot and a homophobe and an Islamophobe and a racist and this. That's all they do. I invited all of them onto my radio show. Any one of you 34, all 34 can come on my radio show. Not one accepted the invitation. Did one invite me into their classroom? Of course not. So constantly referring to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is nothing compared to the whole world, from the New York Times to Joe Biden. The world of the left is a world filled with smearing hate.
Stephen, let me give you the last word on this before we move on.
Yeah, I mean, if Biden was invited to speak about a particular BLM riot, and Biden would have ever uttered the words Antifa, stand back and stand by, like Donald Trump said for Proud Boys, stand back and stand by, I think that the conservative sphere of media would have erupted in anger. If you want to talk about like who's more divisive or not, you just need look no further than the legislation passed in Congress. You know, President Trump ran for how long on repeal and replace the ACA? He wasn't able to replace it. He ran for how long on infrastructure? Biden was the one that passed that bill. Donald Trump didn't. And in terms of Donald Trump just being one man, Donald Trump
infrastructure is so manly as well, like bridges and roads and shit. Like everyone loves infrastructure, and you're so mogged as a Republican if someone else does it and you don't. Fuck.
Was not just one man. Donald Trump is the entirety of the conservative party right now. And if you're a conservative politician or if you're in conservative media, you absolutely know that, because you either toe his line or you are destroyed.
I want to talk a little bit about what's happening now with the presidential race, which has been upended by Joe Biden deciding that he is not going to seek re-election. Dennis, I know from listening to you that you are not likely someone who is going to vote for the current vice president to be the next president of the United States. I don't think that'll come as a shock to our audience. What I am curious about is, do you see her as simply an elected official running a campaign with whom you disagree? Or do you believe that there is the sort of danger of a Kamala Harris presidency that some associate with another presidency for Donald Trump?
The little dimples, or whatever you call them, from his mouth, his wrinkles, I guess, they kind of make it look like he just has a really sad face all the time. Do you see that? He just looks like he's incredibly sad, like cartoonishly sad all the time.
I didn't get the part on the Donald Trump. Do I see her as
His
a dangerous...
trenches.
There is a view that Donald Trump represents a threat to democracy, and that's a phrase that we hear frequently.
Oh, I see, yeah. So
I'm curious whether you see Kamala Harris simply as an elected official you disagree with, or do you feel that the word threat or danger applies?
Yeah, My position and my last column actually was on this subject. To me, it is completely irrelevant which leftist runs.
Really?
Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, Gavin Newsom. It is completely irrelevant. They're utterly interchangeable. All leftists damage everything they touch. This has been true from Lenin until the current leftists, wherever they are.
How the fuck does he get away with this? It's so retarded. Like, fuck me, like Leninists and Gavin Newsom, bro, these guys don't really, they don't get along, okay? Bernie Sanders is not left-wing enough for Leninists.
Not liberals. I have great respect for liberals. I think they're naive, but I have great respect for them. Liberalism and conservatism have a great deal in common. Liberalism has nothing in common with leftism. Leftism hates liberalism. Leftism is illiberalism, anti-liberalism.
Oh, that's a destiny take.
I don't care who the leftist is who runs, whether it's Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom or somebody else. They are utterly interchangeable. Same with Joe Biden. It doesn't matter to me. I listed in one of my columns 25 institutions that the left is destroying, from the universities to the high schools to the elementary schools to the American Medical Association, which has announced that no birth certificate should list the sex of a child because we don't know what the sex is. The child will determine later. That's the American Medical Association, because the left has taken over the AMA. The left has taken over just about everything and destroyed everything, from the Boy Scouts to military recruitment, to music, to art, to architecture. Leftism is a shark. It's a destruction machine.
Jesus.
Okay,
Harris
that's a
is
lot,
irrelevant.
Dennis. Let's allow Stephen to weigh in on that, and a couple of
That's a
specific
lot.
points that Dennis made there.
He's just
One is that there's
schizo-posting.
an
He's
interchangeability
insane.
to who is the Democratic candidate. Number two, that leftism destroys everything it touches. And number three, he mentioned Leninism
Not
sort
the
of in the
Boy
same
Scouts.
breath as modern Democrats. Do you think that's an apt analogy?
I fully agree with Dennis that illiberal people are a danger to society. Right now, there's only one like very popular illiberal candidate. That is easily Donald Trump. When you want to talk about people destroying democratic institutions, I would argue that probably one of the
I want to hear your thoughts on whether or not teachers should feel obligated to tell parents if their kids change name or pronoun. Destiny thinks teachers should tell parents that. Yeah, that's the general rule. Yeah, you should, as quickly as possible. That's the guidelines in Scotland. And Scotland's very progressive on it. It makes sense. But there's a caveat. If you have any fucking inkling that there's abuse going on in the household, and if the kid doesn't want to, if the kid says no, this is how I think it's understood in Scottish guidelines, is that you try to get the parents involved, but if the kid says no, you try and find out why. If they don't want to tell you why, you have to assume that there's a risk that there's a bad reason for that there might be like abuse going on in the household, or they don't trust their parents to not be homophobic or whatever. So you generally would hold off and then just try and ask them at a different time. I don't think you should be obligated to tell them like unconditionally. You have to, but I think in Scotland, as long as you ask the child, then I think you're good to go, because usually the child is the one who would know best about like if they say no, they'd have a reason for it. I don't know.
most important institutions that we have in the United States.
Unless they've been brainwashed into thinking that because their parents are liberal, they'll actually be really transphobic and genocide them. I don't know, but it's probably unlikely to go that way.
The vote is the idea, the concept of the peaceful transfer of power. Donald Trump, in multiple ways, whether it was by encouraging people to lie and submit false electorate votes to Congress, whether it was through a multi-channel pressure against his vice president, of which Pence has come out and spoken plenty about, to get Pence to throw away the actual votes on January 6th. Whether it was getting his attorney generals to write a letter to different states to lie about them having found voter fraud, whether it was Donald Trump lying to the American public, to Raffensperger, to people, to state legislatures in Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, like all of these things, all of these actions were taken to circumvent the peaceful transfer of power, which I think is probably one of the cornerstones of a liberal democracy, of a democratic republic, of a constitutional republic, where we are allowed to vote on a change in leadership and where that leadership is expected to back down or step down if they've lost the vote. So insofar as illiberalism is a huge threat in this country, I agree, but it is exclusively coming from the right now. I don't think that the leftist candidates are leftist at all and that they're socialist or communist. Ironically, as Prager was complaining about calling everybody a Nazi, I know that Republicans have been in the business of calling everybody a communist for decades. I know because I grew up as a Republican and I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh talk about the commies every single day. So this idea that all of these candidates on the left are leftist, I don't think is true in any sense of the word. They're liberal. That's why the examples that Dennis gives of them destroying institutions are whether or not you list birth on a on a birth certificate, whether or not you list the sex or the Boy Scouts, or music or art or architecture. I think that threats to our democracy or the liberal order, I think, are far more evident when you look at the Republicans' attacks on our judicial system, on giving the executive branch, for instance, the power to have criminal immunity when the president takes certain acts. When you talk about trying to overthrow the election, I mean, like you can go on and on. Like the attacks on institutions from the right are far more damaging than any perceived attacks from the left.
What about that, Dennis? Because I hear Steven arguing that there's been sort of a reshuffling here where the illiberalism or authoritarianism is, he argues, now coming from the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. Even if you don't like leftists, would you concede that he's right to some degree about the authoritarianism?
No, because Donald Trump was president for 4 years. And we had far more freedom under Donald Trump than under Joe Biden.
How so?
We can give, the number of mandates, for example, in the government and done by through the CDC and NIH. If you don't wear a mask, you're fired. If you don't get a vaccine, you're fired. If you speak dissent at a college, you're fired. The whole culture of speak
dissent. Oh God, like why then just be clear about what people do to get fucking kicked out of college. Fuck
to big tech and telling them what you consider misinformation from the government. As the Prime Minister of New Zealand infamously announced, if you don't hear it from the government.
Wait, what did Dennis Prager do? He got COVID, didn't he? How did he get COVID? He tried to catch it, didn't he? I have engaged with strangers, constantly hugging them, taking photos with them, knowing that I was making myself very susceptible to getting COVID, which is indeed, as bizarre as it sounded, what I wanted in the hope I would achieve natural immunity and be taken care of by therapeutics. He was also on ivermectin and all this shit. Yeah, the sort of a cocktail of therapeutics he'd been taking. Yeah, he deliberately got himself COVID, yeah. He went around licking doorknobs. Oh God.
It is not true. That's a left-wing position. All truth, and that's why I compare it to Leninism, which was my field. I studied Russian. I went to the Soviet Union a number of times, and he called the Soviet communist paper Pravda, means truth. Truth is what the left says truth is. For 2 years, they lied. The Columbia Journalism Review, published by a rather non-right-wing institution, the most sophisticated or prestigious journalism school in America, Columbia University, wrote a gigantic piece, a major piece on how much the New York Times and Washington Post lied about collusion between Trump and the Russian campaign. And if you differed with that, as you differ with anything, you were dismissed. And you were misinformation, and the way in which they have taken over Google. But all of this is nothing compared to Donald Trump. But Donald Trump was president for 4 years. What did he do during those 4 years? Forget for the moment. I know you can't, because everything is based on January 6th. Up till January 5th of 2021, what did Trump do in 4 years in power that compares to Biden's and the Democrats' suppression of freedom?
If you forgot January 6th, that's a good technique. Okay, is that a concession?
In this country.
Well, let's let Steven answer. And I think, to be fair, Dennis, I'm just kind of an arbiter here. Some of the things you mentioned with regard to masks and vaccines, I believe they happened while Trump was president, not Joe Biden. But I'll let Steven, if he wants to address that. But to Dennis's question, up until January 5th, 2021, what was the illiberalism from Trump?
I would argue that the illiberalism from Trump was Trump's inability to work with Congress and trying to usurp as much power in the executive as possible to do things unilaterally as the executive without getting any kind of congressional approval or legislation from Congress, congressional, obviously. So like an example of this might be he was unable to bring Congress together to get anything done insofar as the border or immigration goes. So instead, he relies on his executive power during times of great emergency to send the military down to the border. That's a usurping of power by the executive to try to run immigration policy on the executive. I don't think that was a very good thing because he couldn't get Congress together to do it. I think that his undermining,
Muslim
even if we
ban,
ignore January 6th itself, and I'll ignore the electorate for fraud and everything else that he did leading up to December 14th and beyond, all of the claims that Donald Trump made about how the vote is going to be rigged, mail-in ballots are going to be rigged. Notice that if you listen to his rhetoric, he never says, this is what we need to do to secure mail-in ballots. This is what we need to do to make sure that our election is safe. All he wanted to do is get rid of mail-in ballots because he knew that Democrats were more likely to vote that way than Republicans. He had no desire to make the election safe. He only wanted to make sure that the election was going to be won by him. When you talk about like big tech and you talk about trying to take away freedoms using big tech, well, we just had Twitter being purchased by Elon Musk, who is, if you watch any of his tweets, is clearly a right-wing supporter. All of his speech and all of his support goes to right-wing candidates or right-wing talking points. And if you talk about a threat to the freedom of tech, well, the biggest threat that was represented to tech was when conservatives wanted to bash Twitter and Facebook over the head with restricting their section or rescinding their Section 230 protections, which would have allowed you to sue essentially people that hosted other people's posts for things that those people posted. You want to talk about destroying big tech or censoring big tech, removing Section 230 protections would have been the number one way to do it. And then when you want to talk about like requests made by big tech, if you want to call those censorship, we got the full Twitter files leaks. And as much as Republicans try to rewrite the record, Taibbi himself said, when it comes to the New York Post story, for instance, there was not a single example. There was no evidence whatsoever of government intrusion into Twitter to ask them to remove that story. But you better believe when that one comedian lady said that Donald Trump was I think a pussy ass bitch, she tweeted, Donald Trump sent in a request to Twitter to have them remove that tweet because he didn't like it.
Wait, what the fuck is that story? What? What is this? Trump tried to get Twitter to remove a post calling him a pussy ass bitch. When the White House called up Twitter in the early morning hours of September 9th, 2019, officials had what they believed is a serious issue to report. Famous model Chrissy Teigen just called President Trump a pussy-ass bitch on Twitter, and the White House wanted the tweet to come down. Others like it are nowhere found in the Twitter file releases. Huh. That is absolutely fucking mental. Okay, that's a good talking point. Good story. Official act,
if you want to talk about like big tech censorship or attempts to do so, we can talk about Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter. We can talk about the types of requests that Donald Trump sent into Twitter, as opposed to the Biden administration, who when they sent in requests for specific tweets to be taken down, it was because they were of pictures of Hunter Biden. I'll just say that, not even close to comparable. And yeah, when you talk about like authoritarian actions, I think that one of the largest authoritarian actions you can take is to try to usurp as much power for yourself as possible. And that might be done in terms of running things that should be done by Congress, like immigration policy, by using the military. That might be done in ways of like undermining an upcoming election and saying that the election is going to be fraudulent, or it might be done in ways of like avoiding ever being held responsible for things that you do for criminal activity, right? The Supreme Court's granted him criminal immunity. He wasn't impeached in the Senate because they said, oh, well, we can't impeach him. He's already out of office. And he pardoned almost every single person that worked with him. Why would he pardon people like Paul Manafort? That's so crazy. I understand why people might want to argue for pardons for maybe like Flynn or maybe Stone, but Paul Manafort, why? It was so crazy. You can look up how many pardons he's done on the presidential website. It's insane compared to any other president.
What do you think, Dennis? I mean, certainly it sounds like a lot of unilateral action for sure. Do you defend all of the things? Do you dispute that Trump did any of the things Steven mentioned? And if you don't dispute it, do you defend it?
Yeah, he started to build a wall. That was I don't know whether it's in his province or not. I don't know what the law is. But it is true. He could not get Congress to agree because the Democrats, since Ted Kennedy in the 1990s, have worked to open the border. You cannot have a civilization with an open border. That is a given.
Like Biden tried to pass legislation that would mean that the border literally gets closed if there are a set number of encounters in a particular day, like immediately closing it. Yeah.
I assume Steven would agree with that open border and keeping a country intact are mutually exclusive. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, that's why nobody asks for an open border.
Oh, yes, the Democrats do. I mean, if you deny that, that's good. You'll be on record then as saying...
Well, define it as policy, Dennis, so we could agree.
This is really critical, really critical. Do you believe, Steven, that the Democrats have been for a controlled border and not for an open border in the last 10 years.
Yep, Obama deported a whole bunch of people, and Biden tried to pass legislation that meant literally the border can close completely, even to people with legitimate claims, if 5,000 people are encountered at the border in one day.
I think the Democrats tried to pass comprehensive legislation that was written by Langford, a Republican in the Senate. I think Donald Trump and the Republicans are the ones that killed that, and that was on public record.
Please
so no, the Democrats have not been for open borders.
Okay, do you believe the Democrats are for a closed border? Okay,
it's not just closed or open, but
can
nobody's
you define it though for us?
The border is a very complicated thing.
Can you define
it's
what
not
you
complicated
mean? It is very
all.
complicated.
It's not complicated.
I'm sorry that you just don't have much information about immigration.
Is a closed border to Dennis Prager just like no one is allowed in? Ever?
Or the border,
okay, good. All right. As I said, I prefer clarity to agreement.
Can you define open border, Dennis?
Yes, letting anybody who wants to come into this country come in. It's not complex.
So can I go to America and just live there just because I want to? I'm pretty sure the amount that I would have to pay as a small business wanker to go to America is like tens of thousands of pounds or dollars, right? I don't think it could necessarily be too far to like a fucking like 100K. I've heard different stories. It depends on different lines of work, especially if you have to explain to like a US official or whatever how my job works and how my income works. God.
And then to be clear, you think that that's the case right now?
That's the case right now. And that is the case what the Democrats want.
He's turning red. He's a fucking mad tomato.
That is correct.
So somebody
Look, I said tomato for the Americans. Just so you understand what I'm saying. I'm being generous to you.
They have sanctuary cities all over my state.
Excuse me, sanctuary city has nothing to do with immigration policy.
Oh, as sure as it does. If you are here illegally, we will not allow ICE or anyone else to take you away. You can come. That's what sanctuary city means.
That is not what a sanctuary city is. That's not what a sanctuary. Sure, I can tell you what it means. When it comes to enforcing immigration, that is exclusively in the purview of the United States government. Now, it tends to be the case that if you're a state official, you can collect information about whether or not a person is here legally or not. And if you want, you can turn that information over to federal authorities like Immigrations and Customs Enforcement or like the Department of Homeland Security. You don't have an obligation to do so. And some cities explicitly say we won't. So a sanctuary city is just a city where if they arrest you, they're not going to do an immigration check. And if you fail, they're going to turn you over to the federal authorities. As somebody that is a conservative, who I imagine would have an appreciation for the concept of federalism, but the important protections of states' rights, because that's what we said when we threw abortion back to the states, you should champion a state deciding whether or not they would want to cooperate with a federal authority when it comes to turning somebody over for matters of deportation. But a sanctuary city does not legalize illegal immigration. It's just whether or not a city wants to cooperate with federal investigators when it comes to turning over an undocumented citizen or immigrant.
Fine. Okay, we can continue.
Do you agree with that, Dennis? I mean, do you recognize that it's an issue of state?
The issue of people crossing a federal border is a federal issue. It is not just a state issue. Okay, it is so elementary. It's a national border. It's not just a state border.
I'd be really careful with that, because that wasn't Abbott's argument when he wanted to enforce the border in Texas. He said that the Texas National Guard should...
And the Republicans were like, oh, what's he going to do? Look at it. He's gaping. Oh, shit.
Oh, you just used the Biden administration.
Well, because there's no federal oversight. Because the Democrats are happy to have a great number of people come in. They're potential Democratic voters in their view.
I think it's fair.
So, Dennis,
is there a single lawmaker or is there a single prominent Democrat that said we want open borders?
No.
Okay.
And so what are the open border policies, Dennis? If the sanctuary city you concede
is not relevant, but the answer is no. Okay, go ahead.
If you concede that the sanctuary cities themselves are not the border, what are the open border policies that are at issue that you would want Steven to either defend or denounce?
No, we have to have only legal immigration. I don't know what. The rendering of a simple concept complex is a way to avoid the moral issue, the political issue, the real issue. The real issue is that under Democratic influence since Ted Kennedy, this is not new, but it has been hastened under Joe Biden, the border has been essentially open to millions of people to come into this country illegally. And you can't even say illegal alien. You can't say alien and you can't say illegal. You now say undocumented immigrant. The very fact that they have changed the language is proof that they are for it.
Well, that's because undocumented can encompass people who are following the law, right? Like asylum claimants, no?
Okay. Let's briefly talk about Project 2025 as we don't have unlimited time.
Damn, that debate would have been better to go deeper.
Steven, I'll go first to you. Project 2025 fears that we're hearing about from the left media ecosystem right now, well-founded fears or overblown or hyperbolic?
I'm going to be completely honest with you. I don't really focus much on policy for conservatives because I don't think conservatives have or run on policy anymore. I think that all of the fears around Donald Trump have to do with his disdain for the constitutional democratic republic that we have and his desire to usurp as much power into his sole position as president as possible. And that's what I focus on. I know that I've seen people talk about Project 2025 and people have fears of Project 2025, but conservatives know nothing about policy and they don't even care to run on policy anymore. So I just personally don't focus much on the particular aspects of that platform, although I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Trump and his administration wanted to push a lot, given some of the quotes that have come out, I think from Donald Trump in the past, and I think JD Vance about it, and the association, like the Heritage Foundation, everything else. But it's not a thing that I particularly focus on.
And to be clear, Steven, you don't focus on it because you don't genuinely think Trump knows anything about it or cares about policy, or because you think it's unlikely to be implemented?
I don't know what the final versions of it would look like when it comes to implementation. I don't know if Republicans will have the necessary majorities in the House or Senate to pass it. My concern is far more singularly with Donald Trump as the head executive than it is with any particular policy platform, because Donald Trump is just not a very effective leader. He's not a good politician. When they were in office, they couldn't pass any policy. They couldn't actually get any legislation passed. So I'm not as concerned about a policy platform as I am about what Donald Trump wants to do as the president or as the executive.
Dennis, what about you? What are your thoughts on the discussion that's been growing, certainly in the last few weeks?
We largely agree. 2025 is irrelevant to the Trump administration, and he has said so. No, I don't know anyone who's read it. It's 800 pages. I haven't read it. Stephen presumably has not read it. It's the Heritage Foundation is a conservative think tank. There are left-wing think tanks, liberal think tanks, conservative think tanks, right-wing think tanks, and they're all permitted to put out whatever they want. Am I permitted? And I'm not being cute. If I'm not, I'm not. But can I ask Stephen a question?
Please.
Okay. Yeah. So Stephen.
Let's say you are on an island.
How do you stand on men who say they're women competing in women's sports?
I'm assuming the question has to do with trans people competing in sports. I think that
why do you have to use so many more syllables to say trans? Everyone knows what trans means. You fucking retard. Anyway.
My personal view is that sports up through probably high school are just
so
there.
Do you see how he's like so resistant to fucking anything that he considers seeding ground, like to the point that even calling them trans people is like too validating. Fucking creep.
For people to kind of like play games and get along with each other and, you know, like build camaraderie and stuff. So I don't really have much of a concern past or up to that point. Once you get to NCAA or professional events, I think that the dividing between the sexes is very important for athletic competition. So I'm generally opposed to trans people participating in the gender they identify with.
So you know then that the Biden administration has extended the anti-discrimination legislation passed to protect women. They have extended it to trans people. You are aware of that?
That they've done what?
They have extended it to trans people so that
wait, extended what to trans people? I'm sorry.
You cannot discriminate against trans people. If a man says he is a woman in college, he should be allowed to play in college sport. That is the Biden administration's position.
I'm not aware of that right now. I thought it went the opposite. My understanding, just to be clear, my understanding is that right now they can't.
All right. So what is your position? Since I think the whole left stinks, you think Donald Trump stinks. So I talk about the left. So let's go to Gavin Newsom. In California, where I live, there is a law. It is a law. It's not a recommendation. That if a kid, an 8-year-old, says that she is a boy, and the school is not permitted to tell the parents that the girl thinks she is a boy and goes by a boy's name in her school. Do you think that is a moral and good law?
I don't think about this. I'm so sorry, but when I look at Donald Trump, this is a man who tried to overthrow the election and resist the peaceful transfer of power. I can't think of the thing that I think.
So what Newsom actually did, even just from looking at the fucking headlines, you can tell he's lying. He was forcing educators to tell parents of their children's asked to use a different name. Yeah, you should not force a teacher to tell a fucking parent if the kid is changing their pronouns. because you might be telling an abusive parent. You need to do just like one little check and balance. It's very easy to say that we encourage parent involvement as quickly as possible, but just do one or two things to make sure that, like, to at least have some reason to believe it's safe. Like, ask the child, why are you have you told your parents? Why are you telling me before you're telling your parent? That's a bit odd. Do you want us to tell the parents? No. Why not? You don't want to say? And you're like, looking like you're fucking shitting it when you say that. Like, okay, well, So you come back to that question, just in case. All right? That's it. It's not difficult.
Think less
There we
about
go.
than how
Okay,
we're
so
trend.
Maybe go around and ask the other teachers. Does this kid ever talk about like their their time at home? Like, do we know any of like there are ways you can figure these things out. Like, you can't get it perfect. You can't get it perfect. You might occasionally like delay telling a parent even though they're fine, and you might also accidentally out a trans kid to a transphobic parent who ends up kicking the child out of the house. Anyway.
People say, just to be clear, hold on, just to be clear for people that don't know, my background.
You
Okay,
guys on the left should thank God every day for.
Hold on, well, wait, Dennis. If Steven, hold on. If Steven doesn't want to answer the question as you see it, allow him not to answer it.
Sure.
But let's hear.
I'll answer it. I'll answer it. I was banned from Twitch for opposing the integration of trans people into sports. I don't think it's appropriate. I probably stand in opposition to a lot of the very, very far left.
Okay.
What?
The law. Okay, so let me just go on record. I can give you the rest. We could talk hours.
Sure. What's the California law for the 8-year-old? Go ahead. What was it?
Yes, you cannot. A school cannot tell a parent. Doesn't have.
This is not the he's so fucking retarded. That's not the law. It's not even the headline. Hang on. Let's see. Did they even get rid of something, or did they signed a law that prohibits policies to force educators? They didn't say you cannot. You can't tell. Like. This guy thinks California passed a law that says you're a teacher, you have to keep it secret. Fuck you, man. God.
Is not allowed to tell a parent if a child identifies as the other sex in a California school.
That would probably be something I'd be opposed to as a parent. I think I would want to know that if my kid was identifying as a different gender in class.
Correct. So.
Oh no, Dustin. I guess if he's like, is it because of the camera contact or whatever? He doesn't want to go and like type stuff up and fact check on the show.
See, if it weren't for Trump, you would have to spend the time with me or anyone else defending the left and their scummy little laws like that ruin lives of kids and have girls get their breasts cut off at 18 or even younger. It's like nothing matters. All that matters is January 6th. Every time I raise an issue, we go back to January 6th.
Because he tried to rebel. It was a rebellion against the peaceful transfer of power.
He told people to go peacefully to the halls of Congress.
He told Mike
to go and pressure Mike Pence to certify the fake electoral votes. Yeah.
Pence. Why were they going there? What were they going there for?
To protest the results of the election.
Exactly.
They thought it was cheating. You're right.
Exactly. It was an insurrection. They thought, no, you're not allowed to protest with violence.
You're not allowed to overthrow, but you were allowed to protest.
When they were going there to support Mike Pence, what did they want Mike Pence to do?
Yes, they wanted Mike Pence not to accept certain electors from certain states.
Exactly.
Yes, that's right.
Correct.
Okay, but okay.
Which was against the ECA, right? That was illegal under the Electoral Count Act, right?
But I don't agree with that, and that's
fine. I don't agree with insurrectionists either, but you understand the ridiculousness of wanting to have a man who is now usurped criminal immunity as the president. So a lot of the illegal actions that he took. Right. Remember, Roberts, in his opinion, said explicitly that when Donald Trump told his acting and his deputy attorney general, can you guys write fake notes to the state legislatures to say that we found evidence of voter fraud that wasn't there? We can't even criminally review that anymore, right? So a man who's now criminally immune, who tried to overthrow the government, that's going to stand out more in my mind, even if they failed at it, than whether or not 8-year-olds in California, their teachers tell their parents if they're trans or whatever. Okay. I didn't say it doesn't matter, but some things matter more than other things.
Right. In the day, you're right. It matters
less.
I am. What happened on January 6th. January 6th is wildly overblown. If it wasn't an insurrection, not a single person has been arrested or indicted on.
Bro, it's the first paragraph of what he's saying. It's actually even more conservative than most progressive, like far-left people would be happy with, this legislation from California. The new law prohibits local school boards from forcing educators to tell parents if their child asks to use a different name or different pronouns. Parents would retain the right to access their child's school records, and minors are still required to get permission from their parents or guardians before legally changing their name or gender. So legally. Because all the headlines for this are like that. They're just, it's so clear. But I guess it's because he's probably never read like an actual teacher's guideline in his entire life, and he just has no fucking, not even like a reference point to figure out what kind of legislation would actually be put in place here realistically. God.
Insurrection. Donald Trump was not accused of fomenting insurrection. The term is a left-wing lie about what happened on January 6th. I don't like January 6th. I condemned it when it happened. It was not an insurrection. That the language that the left uses, fascist, Nazi, insurrection, misinformation.
Gestapo. Because that's what Trump called the Biden administration for bringing criminal charges to him, even though it wasn't the administration. It was like prosecutors.
Disinformation. This is the language of division that you denied the left engages in.
First of all, I've never denied that the left engages in divisiveness. Of course they do. I'm just saying that Joe Biden himself doesn't, which is evident enough by how much joint legislation he's passed. This guy's got 40 years, in government. Of course, this guy, has relationships with people, isn't as divisive as he seems. And I think that's evidenced by what he can pass. To say that the insurrection is the language of leftists, this is the language that came to us in the 14th Amendment after the Reformation, when, surprise, surprise, after the Civil War, people in Congress didn't want leadership again. That was part of the Civil War. That shouldn't be that shocking. There's nothing left-wing about that idea. That should be a very American idea. We don't want people that would try to insurrect the government to fight against it. Also, if we want to talk about health issues, we're welcome to talk about it as well. But I care way less about the leftists have some crazy views on 8-year-olds being trans, which I think is really stupid, by the way. And I agree that that's stupid. But I care way more about the fact that I don't know if we're ever going to have a new vaccine in this country that is going to have mass protests against it now, because conservatives become the party of anti-vax. I think that's a far more pressing public health matter than trans kids.
Yes. Because the CDC is in cahoots with Big Pharma and lied to the American people about masks, about distance, and about lockdowns, and ruined a whole generation's lives because of
Finkelstein entered the room.
About lockdowns and ruined a whole generation.
What's he doing? Norman Finkelstein entered the room.
About masks, about distance, and about lockdowns, and ruined.
Look at him go. Okay, sorry.
A whole generation's lives because of the lie that lockdowns were necessary for kids. Sweden didn't lock down one day for kids, not one kid died. That you defend the CDC, the NIH, and the Democrats, and for that matter, any Republicans who supported lockdowns. It will not be something you will be proud of when you look back at your career.
Yeah, and the entire world was all in cahoots for all the people. You point out Sweden, compare Sweden's death rates to every other European country, even the other Scandinavian countries that did enact lockdowns, and more people died in Sweden.
I have compared them.
Okay, then you know that Sweden fared about the worst of any of those countries.
Only if you compare them to Scandinavia. And Finland has announced that it would do exactly what Sweden did if it ever happened again. They were wrong in locking down their students. If you're on the record as defending nearly 2 years of lockdowns of students.
Wait, what was the story with Sweden again? There was a talking point that right-wingers used about Sweden that was really shit. Like I remember someone compared it to fucking Peru that had lockdown, even though they didn't have any infrastructure to implement it or some shit like that. But I don't think there's evidence that Sweden had it much. I think the actual talking point is that Sweden didn't have it that bad, but they had it worse than other Scandinavian countries that did lockdowns. I thought that's what happened. So, comparing responses of the UK, Sweden, and Denmark. Oh, yeah, UK and Sweden had among the worst per capita COVID mortality in Europe. Sweden stands out for its greater relevance in voluntary rather than mandatory control measures. Timing affected, because UK was late. That was their problem. Fucking Boris cunt. UK mortality would have approximately doubled had Sweden policy been adopted. Swedish mortality would have halved had they adopted UK or Danish strategies. Population density, well, that's why you would want to compare Sweden to neighboring countries. But I thought that was the argument you made to show why they actually had it quite bad. Because people who were right-wing tried to say that Sweden actually had it okay compared to a lot of other countries around the world, but they didn't compare it to like Denmark, where they got absolutely This is cumulative excess deaths per 100,000. Restrictions lifted in June 2022. So it's like middle of 2022, okay? So by this point, Sweden is doing worse than its neighbors. And then before, during the period, they're doing quite a lot worse than their neighbors. All right.
And how did this come to just lockdown of students? But
No,
you
no,
know the lockdowns affected more than just the
it's not
students,
just
right?
lockdown of students,
Okay,
but
'cause
it's
you said that like 3
particularly
times.
egregious because kids were hurt more than adults were because of the lockdown. That's why I'm noting kids.
Sure.
And because it was particularly irrelevant because kids were not dying of COVID, whereas old people were.
Sure, but the issue is that teachers tend to be older people and they were the ones that were worried.
Yes.
Whether
Right.
or not the lockdowns
no
were
teacher died in Sweden. Just
whether or not the lockdowns
no
were good or
teacher
bad.
died in Sweden.
Yeah.
The
But it's about catching it and spreading it as well, for fuck's sake. God.
lockdowns were despicable. Despicable.
Whether or not
that is the reason that people are very, very suspicious and should be. I was never. My brother is a professor of medicine. I trusted doctors like I trusted my own parents. I trusted the medical community. I don't any longer. They've lost my trust.
Yep. Now you trust Joe Rogan and Donald Trump. Yeah. Now we trust podcasters who have every vested interest in lying to you about things in order to make more ad revenue and to sell you more products for whatever vitamin boost or whatever. If you want to talk about lockdowns and them being good or bad, I think at this point, I think the evidence is out that the lockdowns were probably too aggressive. I think most people agree with that. The issue isn't debating whether or not they were good or bad. It's that you conservatives assume that they were done maliciously. The entire world came together to maliciously lock. It's not irrelevant.
You know what?
The motivation for why you.
Malicious. I don't give a damn if it was malicious. It ruined societies. It ruined children's lives. You
don't think the intention of a policy matters when it comes to trusting them in the future? You don't think knowing if they were acting maliciously or not isn't important in deciding if you would trust them?
No, and by the way, well, I will say this with regard to the vaccines and the fact that they were not tested and they were unleashed upon people and that they told children, they still told little babies should get these vaccines when babies aren't dying of COVID. I think there was an element of maliciousness, not in the sense of we want to hurt people, but we
already vaccinate children. What the fuck is he talking about?
We want to have the profits that Big Pharma enables us to have because Big Pharma, let me ask you, do you think Big Pharma has only the interest of the public in mind?
Why was the vaccine distributed in countries that have national health services that don't have the same profit incentive? Like, the governments, like the UK and shit like that, these governments had to fork out a fuck ton of money to pay for COVID stuff.
I'm a liberal capitalist. I think that Big Pharma has the interest of making money. The goal is the FDA and the government to regulate, to make sure that they're adhering to what they're supposed to do. Now, if you want to take the position, that every corporation around the world that would have had plenty of investment in calling this out, by the way, why didn't J&J say that the mRNA vaccines were rigged? If you want to say that every academic institution across the entire world, especially in other countries, weren't calling out the horribleness of the mRNA vaccines, and if you want to make the argument that every country in the world, even those that didn't utilize our vaccines, like China, Russia, Iran, and Qatar, they would have every incentive to say, by the way, those mRNA vaccines are killing Americans. It's strange that all of these people seem to be silent on this issue, but thank God we've got Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson to tell us about how corrupt, and Brett Weinstein to tell us how corrupt, I guess, Big Pharma is. I thought that conservatives used to be proud of large American businesses. This was an operation under warp speed from Donald Trump, a Donald Trump warp speed, a globalist capitalist thing that Americans should be proud of, but we can't even take pride in it because you're so conspiracy brained on it now.
The issue is not conspiracy brained, and sometimes there really are. I will admit to you, I defended the Big Pharma nearly all of my broadcast career. I have been awakened to the corruption that is now involved. I am sorry to say.
You've been awakened to something called audience capture. I think audience capture is what we awakened to.
I never took Robert Kennedy seriously on the issue of vaccines and kids, and now I do. I admit it. I have been chastened by the facts.
The guy that says the polio
listen,
vaccine has killed more people than it's saved. Yeah. Okay,
we could go endlessly on vaccines, but we have come to the end of our time. The last thing I want to ask you, and it really should be just a one word, Dennis, you first. Who do you expect to be the winner of the November election?
Oh.
So I feel bad in not giving you a yes or no or a one-person answer.
Trump or Harris?
I never answer predictive questions. I'm only interested in what I think we need to do. And the thought of 4 years of the left governing the country frightens me in terms of liberty. So,
all right, but you're not making a prediction. Steven, who do you expect to see the win in November?
I'm feeling good on Harris right now.
Feeling good on Harris. Gentlemen, we haven't quite said it all, but we've said a lot of it. Dennis Prager, Stephen
Kamala
Kenneth
Harris.
Destiny
Oh,
Bennell
no.
II.
Imagine if they
Thanks
call
to
her-
both of you for joining me today.
Good to be with you again, David.
So how red
I
did he
never
actually
took
go?
Robert-
Was he always red, or did he go red? No, he's actually notably less red.